Hey folks, Eddie from Totally Wired Guitars here, and today we're going to be doing our deep dive of Fender's brand new Vintera III mid-60s Jazzmaster. Is this the Jazzmaster to get in 2026? Is it all it's hyped up to be based on the early reviews that have come out so far? Now, to answer that question, we are going to be covering a number of things today, from comparing this against other Jazzmasters such as the Vintera 250s and the Vintera 250s Road Worn. We actually have an American Vintage Reissue 62 Jazzmaster, as well as an American Vintage 66. We're going to be covering the basic specs, all of the things that have changed, all of the things that I love about this Jazzmaster, and some of the things that leave a bit to be desired. We're also going to be doing all the nerdy stuff that we love to do on this channel, throwing this thing on the bench, and I'm going to be sharing my findings with you, as well as some setup notes on what you need to do to get this thing playing its best. And then lastly, we are going to be doing some demos and hearing what this thing sounds like, and I'll give you my final thoughts overall on what I think of this new Vintera III mid-60s Jazzmaster. Now, before doing anything else, I want to thank the kind folks over at Zounds for sending this, along with the rest of the Vintera III offset lineup, to me on loan for review. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, it's no secret that the Jazzmaster is the most popular of all of Fender's offset guitars, so offset fans are always excited when a refresh of the Jazzmaster comes out, and the Vintera III Jazzmaster is a pretty significant departure from the previous Vintera II offering. Now, quickly going over some specs, the Vintera III Jazzmaster comes with an alder body, as well as a maple neck and Indian rosewood fretboard. Both are finished in a gloss polyurethane finish, which I've got to say is nicer than the polyurethane finishes from the previous Vintera iterations. This feels thinner to me, and also doesn't feel as plasticky, and closer, in fact, to the feel of the nitro finishes on the Fender American Vintage series. But for me, it has the added benefit of not feeling sticky or gummy like some of the nitro finishes that Fender has been putting out on their American Vintage model the past couple of years. The neck features a 7 1/4 radius with vintage tall frets, which are not actually that much taller than vintage frets. When I measured with my calipers the fret heights on this guitar as compared to the vintage frets on the American Vintage 62 Jazzmaster back there, was on average about 45 thousandths, whereas vintage frets are usually about 40 thousandths or so. For the first time on the Vintera series, we are finally seeing an actual bone nut rather than a synthetic bone nut on the previous Vintera models. And another first is we are seeing real clay dot inlays here. Now, that might not be vintage accurate for the mid-60s, because most of the ones that I have seen owned and serviced from around 1964 and 1965, which this model is supposed to be paying homage to, usually have perloid dot inlays. The Vintera III Jazzmaster also features the standard 1.65-inch or 42mm nut width, but for the first time, as you can see here, in leaning into the vintage accurate aesthetic, Fender is putting their decals over the finish, much like they did on the actual 60s models. In addition to that, Fender is also paying tribute to the Kluson tuners of the 1960s, with this single line logo featured on the back of these tuners. Now, while they look very similar, unfortunately, these are not the Goto made in Japan pure vintage tuners that I initially thought they were upon first glance. But these Ping made tuners, I'm not sure if it's just a placebo effect or what, but they feel super high quality to me, even more high quality than the Ping tuners featured on the Vintera 1s and 2s. They feel nice, tight, responsive, no slip whatsoever. I would not be able to tell the difference in a blind test between these and, for example, the standard Goto SD91s that were featured for forever on the American Vintage lineup. Now, a couple more notes on on this neck. It has definitely got a fuller mid-60s C shape to it as compared to the slimmer 50s C shape on the Vintera II Jazzmaster. In fact, this feels like a much improved, slightly slimmer version of the Vintera 1 neck, if you are familiar with those. When I measured with my calipers, this has a neck thickness of 0.82 inches, very similar or identical to the neck thickness at the first fret as the American Vintage 62, and also the Vintera II, which usually came between 0.82 and 0.83 inches at the first fret, but it does get a bit thicker up here at the 12th fret, measuring around 0.945 inches, whereas the Vintera II would usually top off at 0.88 to 0.90 inches, and most of the American Vintage 62s that I've had usually had a neck thickness at the 12th fret of about 0.90 inches. Now, as compared to my American Vintage 266 Jazzmaster back there, this one is a little bit slimmer at the first fret because that one measured about 0.845 inches, but this one is still a little bit slimmer at the 12th, with the 12th fret thickness on the American Vintage 2 being about 0.936 inches. Overall, this is a really nice, comfortable neck to play. Definitely not too thick, definitely not as thick as the actual vintage mid-60s necks that I have owned and had in the shop, which a lot of times would be close to a full inch at the 12th fret. So that is nice to see. Still very, very playable, not in baseball bat territory. Now, moving on to the hardware, most of the hardware here is unchanged as compared to the Vintera II Jazzmaster, with the only real change here being that the faceplate of the tremolo or vibrato now features the actual patent number rather than the patent pending stamp. Otherwise, the guts of the vintage style tremolo with the trem lock and push-in vibrato arm is the same as before. It's still the same made in Korea high quality unit that if you're thinking about potentially swapping out to just an American vintage unit, I highly recommend probably just sticking with this one. I would say because this is already 85 to 90% of the way there with regards to quality and feel, that it may be diminishing returns if that is the option that you are going for, and you will see a much greater difference if you are deciding to swap out to a Mastery vibrato or a Descendant or Hallen vibrato. As far as the bridge is concerned, this is the same vintage style threaded saddle Jazzmaster bridge that came on the Vintera 1 as well as 2 models. Unfortunately, I cannot report that the tolerances for the height adjustment screws for the saddles nor the bridge itself have improved at all since those previous iterations. They unfortunately still come loose. They unfortunately still rattle. And no doubt, taking the time to sit down and apply some Loctite Purple 222, just one thin strip to the edge of each one of those little set screws, will go a long way in making this bridge actually usable. So don't think that you need to plop down another $100 to $300 on a brand new bridge. If you just take the time, this original threaded saddle bridge might actually work out for you. Now, one of the main selling points for the Vintera 3 model is its improved electronics. It has the same vintage accurate 22 gauge Gavitt cloth covered wiring that they are using on the American Vintage series. And again, as with the previous Vintera line, they're using CTS pots in both your lead and rhythm circuits, as well as your switchcraft switch and input jack. And overall, the electronics here are a high quality affair that do not need any swapping out or upgrading at all from the factory. Another thing that was highly requested and finally reintroduced on this model as compared to the previous Vintera 2 is the conductive shielding paint. All of the cavities were thankfully coated in this conductive shielding paint, and I give the little quotes as a caveat because unfortunately, I've got to be real with you folks. I think that the paint that they're using here, and the same paint that they used on the Vintera 1 before they got rid of it on the Vintera 2, is not actually conductive. You do not even get positive continuity when trying to test it on two different points of the shielding itself, which is different from the shielding paint used on, for example, Fender Japan Jazzmasters that I've tried, where I actually do get that continuity. In addition to that, the pick guard is curiously also not fully shielded. We basically got an adhesive aluminum foil shield around the bottom part of the pick guard as well as the top part, but no shielding around where the pickups are. And then another thing of note is there is a huge oval left untreated with the conductive shielding paint in the neck pickup cavity. So it's clear that the shielding paint was reintroduced here, namely for appearances, namely because people had been outraged that it was removed. But I am, bummed to tell you that, in my opinion, that is basically just there for looks and nothing more. With that said, if you are looking to minimize noise as much as possible, your best bet is probably to either reapply actual conductive shielding paint, multiple layers where you wait for it to dry in between. When I've used it in the past, it usually takes about 3 or 4 coats for you to actually get positive continuity, or you can go with a much easier option and my typical go-to, which is to use conductive copper foil shielding tape. I will say though, depending on the kind of conductive copper foil shielding tape you are using, with the 3M brand being the best with the strongest adhesive, you may find that it is hard for shielding tape to actually adhere to these cavities. And that is something that I've experienced ever since the Vintera 2, which didn't even have any paint in the cavities at all. So definitely take note of that. You might actually have to use some glue to keep that copper foil sitting flat and staying where you apply it. Now, the pickups here have also changed, with Fender listing these as mid-60s style Jazzmaster pickups. And no doubt these do sound different to me than the previous 50s style Jazzmaster pickups in the Vintera 2. Definitely a vast improvement over the Vintera 1 pickups, which just sounded kind of meh to me overall. I really like the character of these pickups. As you will hear, they've got that glassy mid-60s Jazzmaster tone to them, and it helps too that they did this time around give these pickups, at least as far as DC resistance goes, a bit more output. When I used my multimeter to measure the output on these pickups, I was getting a reading of 7.17K on the bridge pickup and 7.12K on the neck pickup. I'm not sure what kind of magnets they are using here, but likely if this is supposed to be an homage to the mid-60s, and these are Alnico 5 magnets, and as a result of their updated construction, I feel like these pickups also give me a bit more character and a bit more color, and the slightly increased output also hits my tube amp in a more pleasing way. It definitely gets my Princeton Reverb reissue to the edge of breakup a lot quicker than even the pure vintage 65 pickups, which are usually around the 6.5K range. Now, one gripe that I do have about these pickups, along with the rest of the Vintera Jazzmaster pickups that have come out since the introduction of the Vintera series, is the fact that these tend to be way noisier than most all of the Jazzmasters that I've ever had in the shop. They do sound nice, but do be warned that you really get a very, very present and loud 60 cycle hum, which you can hear here. Comparing to an American Vintage 62, you can hear that the 60 cycle hum is definitely still here, even with the brass shielding plates that are in this. But There is an overall sharper kind of sound, like buzziness to the 60 cycle hum that come from the Vintera pickups. And again, something that I've seen consistently across the board with the Vintera releases. Now, this Jazzmaster did need a pretty intensive setup, unlike the Vintera 3, Jaguar, and Bass 6, where there was a very noticeable incline to the neck pocket. This one here sat a bit more flat and did require me to add a shim to the inner neck pocket here to get my bridge sitting at the height that I want it to, which is typically around that 2.5 to 3 millimeters. Prior to adding the shim, the action was just a bit too high, sitting at over 3 millimeters at the 12th fret at both the low E as well as the high E. So adding a cardstock shim that is the equivalent of about 0.5 degrees if you use the full pocket StewMac or no name brand wooden shims, definitely helped with the setup, and adjusting the truss rod a bit to get about 0.006 of an inch relief when measuring at the 8th fret definitely made this a much more pleasing to play Jazzmaster overall. I did take the liberty of applying Loctite to improve the bridge, and thankfully I am no longer getting any more string jump. I'm no longer getting any of the rattles or buzzes that were coming from the bridge that I was getting from its stock. So again, that definitely is worth taking the time to do. And then it did need the tremolo calibrated because there was way too little spring tension from the factory, and the arm too needed to be bent up ever so slightly to give it an overall much more pleasing and responsive feel. And the feel of this vibrato can be made even better if you do the trick that my buddy Che Choi taught me a little while ago, where you unscrew the tremolo arm tip, add a bit of super glue to the threads of the tip of the tremolo arm here, and then just let it kind of sit just on the edge. That gives you about 1.25 inches or so more length and requires less actuation force for you to actually make that tremolo whammy and wobble the way that it should be, and it just feels a lot closer to the longer spec vintage arms that used to come on the actual 60s Jazzmasters, as well as the older American vintage 62 and 65 Jazzmasters. Now, with all of those technical details out of the way, I've gone ahead and plugged us into the old Princeton Reverb reissue, and let's hear what this thing sounds like. All right, so this is our clean tone. We are on our bridge pickup with just the tiniest bit of reverb on the amp. And now both pickups in parallel. Now our neck pickup. And our rhythm circuit with both the volume and tone all the way up. Now, I don't know if y'all can hear what I was talking about before. It's definitely a very bright mid-60s kind of tone that we've got going on here. I use the word glassy because it's got a lot of kind of like chime and sparkle to it. Definitely a departure from the darker, more gritty sound that we were getting from the Vintera II pickups. So y'all can be the judge on which ones you like better. I like both of them, to be honest with you, but for me personally, I do like the darker late 50s kind of tone, and those are my go-tos usually if I am picking a custom set of pickups from, say, EP Custom or Curtis Novak. But that said, I do enjoy this mid-60s tone. Over the course of the past, 15 some odd years, I've owned two different vintage 1965 Jazzmasters. Both of them sounded nearly identical to my ears. And while they had this glassy, chimey thing going on, they did have a bit more lows and mids to them for an overall fuller tone, which I'm not really getting here. It's more so kind of the brightness and upper mids that are coming through, which is giving us all of that sparkle. So we're back on the bridge pickup. I've turned the amp's volume up to give us a bit more of that natural tube breakup, and I've got my volume at 10, but my tone knob is down to about 60%. We are going to go ahead and try out a fun new pedal that I've got here from Pedal Partners. It's the Dreamgazer. It's their kind of shoegazer pedal in a box. Now, this is currently on the shallower setting on the pedal. It's got 3 different modes: reverse, blossom, and shallower. So let's go ahead and hear what this thing sounds like with both pickups in parallel, our volume at 10 and our tone knob at 50. This pedal is friggin' awesome. I can't wait to dive into a bit more of this. All right, we've dialed the volume on the amp back a bit. We are now on the neck pickup with the volume at 10 and the tone knob down to about 8. Let's go ahead and hear what this sounds like. Now, lastly, we're back on the rhythm circuit. Both volume and tone are at 10, and we're going to turn our Dreamgazer back on, set now to the blossom setting. So let's hear what this sounds like. Now, overall, my thoughts on this Jazzmaster are very, very positive. The feel and quality of this is definitely an improvement over the previous Vintera 2s. Thankfully, I was not getting any kind of fret sprout here. Again, that is an environmental phenomenon that happens when the air becomes too dry and the fretboard shrinks. So I'm not sure if that's going to stand the test of time, but I was glad to see that it was not present out of the box. The actual fretwork here is also very, very decent. I found a minimal amount of high frets that thankfully did not result in any significant fret buzz, even when setting the action to less than 2 millimeters on both the low E and the high E when applying the minimal amount of relief on the neck. It is just a pleasure to play overall. Now, who is this Jazzmaster for? I would say that if you've been in the market for a mid-tier Jazzmaster with premium appointments, it really does not get that much better at this particular price point. The most direct comparison that I could make would be to one of the traditional 60s Fender Japan Jazzmasters, which can be a hassle to import, can be more expensive given the additional tariffs and shipping and handling from Japan. And so at $13.50, this is a really, really excellent Jazzmaster. There's also a couple things here that you're not going to be getting with a modern day Fender Japan Jazzmaster. Most of those traditional 60s models, if you aren't springing for one of the store exclusive FSR models, is that you are getting an alder body on the Vintera III Jazzmaster as compared to the basswood on the traditional 60s models. Fender has given us some matching headstock options with the Vintera III in both the candy apple red and the sonic blue finishes. You also are getting way better tuners here than the standard traditional 60s models, which come with no-name economy tuners and are definitely a downgrade from what they had been using for many, many years, the Goto SD91s. And also the cloth-covered premium spec wiring harness here is definitely not something that you are going to find on one of the traditional 60s Jazzmasters. I also am going to go ahead and say that this vibrato, at least for me, is way better than the Fender Japan Tremolo, even the improved ones that have been coming out over the past couple years. I'd say they are comparable with regards to their threaded saddle bridges, and I definitely like these pickups more than the stock pickups that come in the traditional 60s models. Now, if you already have a Vintera 1 Jazzmaster, I would say this is definitely a worthy upgrade. And if you have a Vintera 2, those were already quite good quality. You have to make sure that you do want a slightly fuller neck because it is definitely noticeable between the two models. But aside from that, I definitely wouldn't spring for this model just because of the cloth covered wiring and because of the reintroduction of the conductive shielding paint. This one too here, while others have reported that some of the ones that they've gotten have been quite lightweight, this one here is an average weight of about 8.2 pounds. So nothing to write home about, but thankfully not a bowling ball on a stick, so to say. So that is at least nice to see. Now, for another $350 more, should you get this or the Vintera II Road Worn Jazzmaster, which is still available, with that extra $350, you are getting a nitrocellulose finish on both the body and the neck. You are getting an actual hard shell case that retails at $200+ by itself. So no doubt, if you prefer a nitro finish, one that is going to age over time, I feel like that is $350 worth spending. You might also be able to find one of those road worn ones used for the same or even less than this one goes for new. So that definitely is a tough call to make and will come down to your preferences with regards to the neck profile and also the overall aesthetics of those Jazzmasters. So if it were me and I had a choice, I probably would go with the Vintera II Road Worn, namely because that was my #2 Jazzmaster released last year, and it still holds up with regards to being one of the best Jazzmasters Fender has ever produced. So that is a tough call to make. Now, a couple of areas for improvement. I definitely think that if Fender can just get the tolerances right on those set screws for the bridge, it would make the experience so much better out of the box. The other thing is they are unfortunately still using that super dry rosewood. This is not the same kind of finish that you get when you're getting an American vintage model or even an American Pro classic Jazzmaster. This is just really dry, and while I appreciate the fact that it is nice and dark here, that is definitely another place where this guitar or future Vintera series can be improved. And of course, I've already mentioned this, but it would be nice if you're going to go and apply shielding paint to begin with. Do it right. Make sure there's actually positive continuity to the circuit to show us that it actually works. I hate to say that this is nothing more than just checking off a box for people's requests while not actually delivering on what it's supposed to do. In addition, it can't cost that much more to actually fully shield the pick guard. Right? Just these places where they've decided to cut corners is just a little baffling to me. And I think the overall impression of their mid-tier Fenders would drastically improve if they actually delivered on that front. And another thing that I discovered from the bench was, unfortunately, they are still using those tiny thimbles. The inner bore of the stock thimbles that they use here make it difficult to use certain bridges as drop-in upgrades. The first one that comes to mind, of course, is the 7¼ radius American Pro bridge, effectively the same bridge that comes on the Johnny Marr Jaguar as well as the Troy Van Leeuwen Jazzmaster, which have legs or posts that are way too thick to fit inside of these tiny thimbles, which doesn't really make that much sense to me, especially since Fender sells those as aftermarket parts. And yeah, a missed opportunity. And lastly, another area of improvement that I think that they really missed the boat on is the custom colors. I feel like they pulled out all the stops for the Jaguar this time around with the shell pink, with the Sherwood green finish. Candy apple red is undoubtedly nice to see again, especially with a matching headstock, but I feel like they could have done even better and really made these that much more appealing to folks. Maybe a charcoal frost metallic, maybe a burgundy mist metallic, rather than sonic blue again, which we already got in the Vintera II series. So yeah, that was a little bit surprising. I definitely feel like they could have ramped up the excitement a bit more on the aesthetic front with these Vintera 3s. Anyway, overall, I really do think this is one of the best Jazzmasters that Fender has released over the past couple years. Obviously, like with all Jazzmasters out of the box these days, including significantly more expensive ones, giving it the attention to detail through a full setup is going to make it feel so much better than it does out of the box. So do not judge this guitar based on how it feels when you go to check it out in a shop, or even if you were to order one. Definitely, if you do not have the skills or the know-how or tools to do a complete full setup on a Jazzmaster, then it's definitely worthwhile to take it to your tech to have a good setup done, because underneath it all, as I said again, is one of the best Jazzmasters Fender has produced in the past 10 years. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Definitely let me know what you think down in the comments. Have you tried this Jazzmaster out? Did you buy one on release day? And what are your thoughts on it so far? Especially if you do have other Jazzmasters in your stable, how does it compare to those other ones? Let me know, as I know that I and everybody else who is potentially thinking about buying one of these will very much appreciate it. Another shout out and thanks again to our friends over at Zounds. If you are thinking of buying one of these Jazzmasters or on any of the other Vintera 3 offsets, please definitely use the affiliate links down below. It costs you nothing extra and definitely helps this channel immensely. So thanks in advance to anyone who's thinking about potentially getting one and using the affiliate links. As always, if you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell to be notified of new videos as soon as they drop. And don't forget to follow Totally Wired Guitars for more offset guitars buying tips.